Welcome to the TomKat Center Summer 2023 Innovation Showcase. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We've been running this series actually since the spring of 2020, and it's been a really successful event series for us. So we're excited to welcome you back if you've been to one of these before, or welcome you for the first time if you haven't. As usual, we have a really interesting collection of presenters talking about their new ventures from three different industries, and we'll get to them very shortly. I want to just give a really brief intro for those of you who haven't been to one of these events before. The presenters that we feature are from Stanford. So they're entrepreneurs from Stanford that have started new ventures that we have supported here at the TomKat Center through our innovation transfer program. And these ventures are developing products intended to have an impact in sustainability and energy. And we take a very broad view of those two areas. And so you'll see innovations that span many different industries. Innovation transfer has been running for about 10 years now. And it's been quite a successful program. So you're really just seeing a snapshot of the latest teams that we've supported today. If you're interested in learning more about some of the other ventures, I think we have 75 plus companies and counting now that have started through the innovation transfer program, many of which have gone on to grow to become quite substantial enterprises today. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out the link to the web page that Donica posted in the chat. So what's going to happen today is that each presenter will give about a 10-minute presentation telling you about their company and what they're trying to do, and maybe a little bit about what they're looking for now. One of our big goals here today, perhaps the biggest goal, is to make connections. And so we really encourage you to reach out if you're interested in connecting to any of the presenters today to learn more about what they do or find ways to work together. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them through the Q&A feature. So after the presentation, we'll have about a 5-minute Q&A session with each presenter. I'll do my best to accommodate the audience questions submitted through the Q&A feature during that time. So hopefully you get a chance to see the scope of innovation in this space going on at Stanford, and to be inspired, and like I said, to connect if you find a way that you can work with some of the teams presented here today. So today, the three teams span carbon capture, ag tech, and fintech. So we're actually gonna start with carbon capture, and our first presenter is Amit Bharti from Control Z. So Control Z is working to democratize what's called direct air capture. So briefly, direct air capture means capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, and then that can be coupled with sequestering that CO2 to essentially remove greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. There's been a tremendous amount of research and development activity in this space, and I think a lot of acceleration in that activity in the last several years. And in fact, many of the scenarios for addressing climate change this century invoke massive carbon removal, which entails capture and sequestration of CO2. Yet at present, DAC is limited to a few very small scale demonstration projects. So there's an enormous amount of scale up that would need to occur in order for DAC to contribute meaningfully to carbon management. Control Z is working to democratize DAC so that it can grow more rapidly, and I'll let Amit tell you about how they're going about that. So without further ado, Amit, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Let me pull up my screen here. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm Amit. I recently graduated from Stanford GSB. I'm very glad to represent Team Control Z for today's showcase on our solution aimed at democratizing carbon removal. Personally, I grew up in Himalayas and have personally witnessed the enormity of the environmental damage firsthand all through my growing years. You know, it's just that when we live in cities, we don't realize, but when we go into nature, we can see the damage. And my experiences essentially drove me to dedicate the rest of my life from this point onwards to climate action. Before I get into what we've been up to, I would like to spend 30 seconds with you to remind ourselves of what is going on this summer in South Asia, particularly India. What you just saw has been happening almost every year and at an increasing intensity. Many believe that we can still manage within 2 degrees, but I don't think we can afford even 1.5 degrees, given the devastation we are already witnessing. So despite all the emission mitigation efforts, our emissions are projected to grow. Last year was the 11th consecutive CO2 year where the CO2 increased by the highest ever sustained rate. So our emissions essentially need to nosedive from here onwards, and carbon removal is now necessary. And we need to do it urgently at a massive speed and scale, like Matt mentioned. Now, if you look at the current solution that we have, is like this kind of a big, large industrial carbon removal plant. This one has a capacity of 36,000 tons. The largest plant with a capacity of 1 million tons by 2030 is under construction, has been recently funded by the DOE, and is planned to be operational in a few years. But currently we have only 27 operational plants with a total capacity of a tiny 0.01 megatons. So, but we need to remove like 1 gigaton a year by 2025, and our removal targets will grow exponentially, as you can see, by 2050. So we believe that such large plants are a part of the solution, but cannot be the only solution. Each of these costs like several hundred millions each, have a high operating cost at $300 to $500 per ton, have a long gestation period of 2 to 6 years at the quickest, and also requires specific sites such as class 6 wells or basalt rock beds for CO2 sequestration. So if you were to follow this model, then we need 3,000 such plants by 2030, which means we need 34 plants per month. by 2030, which is impossible. Therefore, we need a different approach. And with that in mind, we actually considered 4 design principles to come up with something new, something different. The first one is, let's do DAC at places where there is already existing air movement so that we don't have to spend energy on moving the air, which is an essential component of direct air capture. Can we come up with a solution that can achieve a civilization scale so that we can enroll everybody into this mission so that we can democratize it? Can we come up with something that is really, really low cost, super creative, and offers a permanent storage for the CO2 captured? And something that is really modular, not a clunky monolithic plant, but instead something easy to assemble, install, run, and manage. So with these 4 design principles, we came up with the solution of making the HVAC systems in the large commercial buildings to do the job of carbon capture, passive carbon capture. And this offers us many advantages. The key advantages are that we are leveraging the existing air circulation infrastructure, which is helping us slash the capex that is involved in a typical DAC project. This is better than DAC because the CO2 that we are capturing is rich in CO2. This is the air that is coming out of the building. We are using renewable energy, so it further lowers our OPEX. We use low-cost solvents that are abundantly available. Also, it gives us that scalability that is needed because HVACs are ubiquitous. They're everywhere in every city. Our system is easy to retrofit, can be installed in a matter of few weeks, and will cause minimal disruption to the primary function of HVAC and not cause any significant pressure drops. And the captured CO2 also gets mineralized and sold to concrete industry for permanent storage. So someone might ask that why commercial buildings HVAC system? The answer is that we have 6 million commercial buildings in the US alone, 18 million buildings across all the developed economies, and 48 million commercial buildings all over the world. So each of these buildings has the potential to capture around 40 tons of CO2 every year, giving us that gigaton scale potential that we need. Each building can save up to $40,000 in energy costs, can improve the indoor air quality, comply with the emerging regulations of embedded and operational emissions of the buildings. They can avoid carbon tax in certain jurisdictions, and they can earn carbon credits for the CO2 capture. So right now we are developing 2 solutions. One is based on solid sorbents. The other one is based on liquid sorbent. Our device essentially captures CO2 from the return air before it gets recirculated. Return air typically has CO2 concentration of 1,000 to 2,000 ppm compared to the ambient air concentration of 420 ppm of CO2. So the recirculated air will have significantly lower concentration, within the 800 ppm permissible limit as per the building codes. So this essentially lowers the HVAC load to maintain the indoor CO2 levels within the permissible limits, and results in saved energy costs for the building. So also the CO2 that we capture from the exhaust air further lowers the building's emissions. And this helps the building owners meet their need to be net zero. So the captured CO2, like I said, gets eventually mineralized. We are building both these prototypes to achieve the sweet spot of highest efficiency at the lowest cost. If you look at in terms of cost comparison, so overall with the chemical, mechanical, logistical, and business model innovation, we will be able to do it under $60 a ton. Our air contactor capex is 1/4 of the traditional DAC unit. We use a creative sorbent chemistry involving low-cost materials. We use renewable power, and our other capex is less than 8% of the traditional DAC plant. So all this helps us achieve a low cost, which is fundamental to our value proposition. Now, if you look at the overall market landscape of this, 27% of the emissions come out of building operations, and a significant portion of this 27% is contributed by the emissions contributed by the occupants of the building. But we believe that overall, this is a unique space. I think this challenge is such that there can only be collaborators, because no one company can achieve the scale that we need, on its own. So there are essentially like a few players right now. Soltair Power, based out of Finland, and rest of the three are based in the US. But existing players put together can't even do one megaton. So I mean, we really need to have 1,000 flowers to bloom, because the pie is massive enough for each one of them to flourish for many decades. So the key is who can do it faster at lower cost, and who can build strong partnerships. So that's what we are going after. In terms of our timeline and next steps, we've covered some distance, and right now in summer, we're working on process design, running simulations, doing the CAD design, and procuring materials. By the end of the fall quarter, we aim to showcase our prototype system, secure an early MOU with our first potential customer, and also explore early partnerships with concrete players like Carbon Built and Carbon Cure, the carbon credit platforms such as Stripe, and also have partnership with cylinder logistics players such as Smart Cylinders. Coming to the team quickly, this is our founding team. Along with me, I have Ananya, who is a master's student in the Environmental Engineering School at Stanford. She's been working on carbon removal and is a PITS Pilani alum. I was in consulting. I was a principal at BCG, done some work on sustainable smart cities, have some certification on sustainability as well, focused on sustainability here at Stanford as well, and did directed research on carbon removal at Stanford during my time here. We are guided by two professors, Professor Barnett, who is a professor at the Dorr School of Sustainability, as well as the GSP, and he's also the former TomKat faculty sponsor for this project. And we are also supported by Professor Ellen Tall, who is a climate and sustainability professor at Stanford GSP. We have an incredible R&D and product team comprising a PhD candidate in material science, a PhD candidate in physics, a PhD candidate in chemistry, and a master candidate in mechanical engineering. The team has been working regularly to build our prototype by the end of this year. We are right now seeking funding support and partnerships to further support our mission. So that's about us. I can be reached at this email and LinkedIn for any further questions. I am happy to answer a few questions here in the remaining time we have, in case somebody can post it in the group, and Matt can help us with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Amit. We have a few minutes left for questions. A lot of questions in the Q&A, most of them centered around the technology and just trying to get a better understanding of the system that you envision and you're developing. Maybe you can help me understand something about the sort of overall energy requirements. So I understand you're taking advantage of the circulation, the air circulation already provided by the HVAC system. So you have savings there compared to a conventional DAC system. But typically in DAC, most of the energy is in the desorption from the sorbent. So is the desorption that takes place sort of on site, and that's the renewable energy input that you mentioned for your system comes from the desorption step, since the fans are sort of paid for by the building, or is there sort of another scenario? And I guess coupled to that, when you desorb, then do you put the CO2 in tanks and transport to the mineralization site, or can you give us a better picture sort of the logistics?
Yeah. So from an energy requirement perspective, our estimate is in the range of 3 to 4 gigajoules. And we are going to generate our own power using an auxiliary renewable power unit, which will work in tandem with the HVAC system. And the CO2 will be desorbed on site and will be compressed into cylinders, which will get replaced every month through our cylinder logistics partner.
Okay, and so then those are going to get sort of shipped and collected somewhere for
Mineralization.
For the utilization. Okay.
Yes.
And so I guess the energy requirements then, since there are, I forget the number, what was it, 40 million buildings or so, have you done some analysis in terms of the transportation costs, of both costs and footprint of moving a lot of tanks around to transport CO2 from all of these distributed sites to then, the site where they're going to be utilized for mineralization?
Yeah, so our the logistics cost is in the range of $14 to $15 per ton of CO2, and for the carbon footprint of the logistics, we are still doing the LCA, because it's every time we do an iteration, some new components comes in. So we are still working on the LCA to make it more comprehensive.
Okay, great. And some questions around, can you give a little bit more information about how this saves money for the building? You mentioned that you can actually reduce the HVAC load because you're pulling out the CO2 from the recirculation loop, and so that can go back into the building. Can you give us do you have an estimate of sort of cost savings associated with adding this unit to the HVAC?
So I mean, there is a $40,000 on an average cost saving, purely because of lower HVAC load to keep the air quality within the permissible limits. So that is the direct cost saving that a building is making by having this in place. And then and they also comply with their regulations. Just recently, California came up with new regulations for the embedded emissions for the buildings. So similarly, we'll see similar regulations coming in other states as well. So it is going to become increasingly important for buildings to actually lower their overall emissions. So our solutions helps them do that. Our solution will also help buildings avoid any carbon tax in certain jurisdictions, and they can also earn carbon credits for the CO2 captured through their buildings.
So yeah, so it sounds like California is a good location for. I know you were interested in perhaps even piloting on Stanford at one point, but California is a good sort of initial market. Are there other states or cities that are particularly well suited from a regulatory perspective for initial market?
Right now, the focus is California. I think if you can't do it in California, you can't do it anywhere else in the world. So California itself will take some time for us to actually achieve the scale. And we're also going to roll out our solution in India, because I understand India market quite well, and I think that market requires a lot of help in this space.
Great. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thanks so much for sharing your vision and your journey with us, Summit, and we look forward to seeing how Control Z develops. So thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're gonna shift from buildings and urban environments to farmland. So our next presenters are Peter Westbrook and Esteban Herrera Vendrell from Fundusol. So Fundusol is developing a data-driven approach to agrivoltaics. That's the co-location of crops and photovoltaics to really ease burdens for farmers and enable them to get more productivity out of their land. Just as a sort of interesting fact to help set the stage here, there's approximately 900 million acres of farmland in the US. So that's an absolutely enormous resource. Acreage is actually going down slowly, yet productivity in terms of output off the farmland continues to increase. So there's a lot of innovation taking place in agriculture. And Peter and Esteban are going to tell us about their vision for really accelerating the development of agrivoltaics. So thank you for joining us.
Of course. Yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
We're good.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Esteban. I'm with my partner, Pete, and we are super excited to have the opportunity to present to you guys today. And thank you all for coming and tuning in. So today we're going to be talking about Fundusol, our company, and how we're pushing to innovate in agriculture and renewable energy. Could I get the next slide? Thank you. So first and foremost, let me just give a brief introduction of the team. On the left is Michael Bendock. He has several years of experience in the solar industry, doing both design and consultation for solar arrays, ranging from tens of kilowatts to hundreds of megawatts. Peter Westbrook, who's on the call with me, his expertise is in quantitative finance, where he's dedicated years of work in both research and in industry. On the far right is Luca Borletti. He's our software expert, from website design to involved work at companies like Amazon that I'm not even going to pretend to understand. He knows the ins and outs of software and web design, and he makes sure that our website and our software, which we'll get into shortly, works to the highest of standards. And as for myself, my specialty is in physics and computer simulations. I've modeled problems from low temperature physics and dark matter detectors to asteroid orbits and thermodynamics, and I use that to direct our modeling efforts. Next slide. Thank you. So let's get into the meat of this. To best explain how we are innovating in the solar energy and agricultural industries, I think it's best to go over why these innovations are even necessary in the first place. First of all, water is scarce. According to researchers at Harvard, in under 50 years, over half of the freshwater basins in the United States are not going to be able to meet their monthly water demands, which is very scary. Finding ways to be more efficient with our use of water has never been more important. On top of that, crop yields are plummeting. With temperatures rising and droughts running rampant due to global warming and climate change, it is becoming harder and harder to produce full yields and have healthy livestock because they suffer from heat stress and dehydration. And finally, electricity is expensive and unreliable. Utilities all around the country are hiking rates every single year, which combined with blackouts and brownouts are a huge financial concern for farmers all around the world. And that's also very concerning. Thankfully, though, our presentation is about one of the solutions to these problems, which is agrivoltaics. In a nutshell, agrivoltaics is the practice of putting solar panels on top of active farmland. This land can be used for growing crops or grazing livestock. Either way, there are a plethora of benefits that come along with this. because of the fact that crops suffer from heat stress and dehydration, especially in arid environments like some parts of California and Arizona, the shade produced by these panels creates something called a microclimate, which is the reason for a lot of the benefits that we're going to be talking about. So could I get the next slide? So to talk a little bit more about the microclimate effect, as you can see here in this graph, it has benefits in pretty much the entire nexus of the system, from solar productivity, which increases due to the lower temperatures around crops since they transpire, and that pulls heat in from the environment, lowers the temperature, and improves the efficiency of photovoltaic cells, to the fact that the shade cast over the crops can reduce the temperature and even improve moisture retention, which improves the efficiency of irrigation, which is becoming a huge problem, as I mentioned, and also can increase yields. Actually, and this is very shocking, researchers at the University of Arizona ran experiments with agrivoltaic systems, and they found that under agrivoltaic systems, chitlapin peppers yield triple what they typically do, and tomatoes yield double. This ranges from crop to crop, but there are certain crops, mostly shade tolerant ones, that really excel in these systems. Next slide. So naturally, since the problems I mentioned earlier affect farmers all around the world, agrivoltaics has also started to take off all around the world. With over 1,000 research papers on the subject, 2,900 megawatts installed all around the world, and almost 40% annualized growth rate of the industry, it is young and robust and growing extremely quickly. Could I get the next slide? Thank you. So with such a revolutionary practice that has benefits to every single aspect of agrivoltaics, solar side, crops, livestock, there's always going to be room for improvement and innovation. And that's what we're looking to do at FundUSol. Our mission is the following: to make solar energy affordable and accessible to any farmer that wants it, to design the right system using our software, which optimizes the health of the crops or the livestock underneath, as well as the solar output that the panels produce, and to empower farmers to adopt new technology, since typically technology like this is something that is harder to break into for people in the farming industry, simply because it is expensive and farmers are typically resistant to big changes like this. So we are looking to find a way to make it accessible, affordable, and efficient.
Thank you, Esteban. So I'd like to talk a bit about FundUSol's core innovation, which is our predictive agrivoltaic system design algorithm. So I'll explain it as kind of an input process output model. So in terms of inputs, the first thing it takes in is farm attributes. So what crops is the farm growing? What growing seasons is the farm growing them in? What are the relative values of crop yield as compared to energy savings as compared to water budget? In addition to that, it'll take in the layout of the system being built. So how high the panels may be off the ground, how far apart they're spaced, what kind of angle the panels are at, etc. And finally, it'll take in the latitude and the longitude of the system in order to source relevant climate API data. So with these inputs for each system, it'll run 3 models. First, it'll take historical averaged irradiance data for that location and combine that with the specific geometry of the panels to give a comprehensive prediction of what the shadowing dynamics will look like underneath the array throughout the growing season at every point in the field. Then it'll take that as well as historical averaged temperature data for the location and feed it into a thermodynamic model to model also the temperature dynamics throughout the area underneath the array throughout the relevant growing season. So with this data on the microclimate underneath the solar panels, and how that might be different from without solar panels. It'll then feed all of that into a biomass model, which is specific to the crop or crops being grown in this exact project, as well as other relevant climate forcings that are sourced from APIs, such as atmospheric pressure, wind speed, precipitation, and so forth, and run the biomass model to produce a predicted crop yield for the growing season, as well as a predicted irrigation budget to avoid any water stress. So all of this gets combined with Python's PVSYST package, which allows us to predict the energy output of the solar panels themselves, and allows us to make a comprehensive report for any given agrivoltaic project of what the solar output, crop yield, and optimal irrigation schedule will look like. But the functionality of our algorithm goes well beyond just predicting the results of an individual system. Thus far, the most common use case for us has been system selection for farms interested in agrivoltaics, farms that have set crops that they grow and set growing seasons where they grow these crops and are interested in bringing solar into the mix. We can iterate over millions of possible system choices for them and choose whichever one had the best performance according to their needs in our predictions, which allows them to make an informed choice even before they need to install panels. Another use case for our algorithm is agricultural optimization. If there's an agrivoltaic project on land that is not already existing cropland, but where there's interest in dual land use, we can recommend a set of crops and a set of growing seasons to grow those crops that will thrive underneath the specific microclimate produced by the system. And finally, for solar developers, our holistic approach to agrivoltaic modeling, taking into account both the solar and the agricultural side of things, allows us to give a much more comprehensive economic forecast of what the project will look like over the next several decades before installation occurs. So that's a general overview of our algorithm. And I also wanted to provide a bit of an update as to where we're at with that currently. So right now, we're quite early stage. We're beginning to acquire some initial clients and get some initial contracts signed, first couple of projects under construction. So far, we've mostly been marketing to farms interested in solar energy for their own agricultural use. And we found that the best way to market to farms like that is through a trusted mutual connection. So to that end, we've partnered with the director of Rogue Farm Corps to help connect us with farmers and bridge that initial barrier. In addition to this, we are also actively pursuing data-driven validation of our algorithm. We recently partnered with Western University, located up in Ontario, Canada, to do data sharing, both for data collected under systems that we design and have constructed, and for experiments that Western University is conducting over the course of the next year on their campus up in Canada. So we want to use all that data, both the stuff from our systems and from Western systems, to validate the performance of our algorithm and modify it as necessary. In addition to that, we're also building out a general infrastructure and pipeline for project developments, which requires a wide network of solar developers to actually get these systems constructed. And currently we have a large range of developers of really all shapes and sizes, but certainly two of the most prominent ones are TRC companies and distributed solar development. So that's where we are. But where we're going is in some ways more of the same. We want to expand our client and developer networks and get more and more agrivoltaics built according to our algorithm. With those additional agrivoltaic projects designed by us, we want to continue the empirical validation and continue the improvement of our algorithm. And on top of that, we want to, as we become more established, begin to consult on utility scale agrivoltaic projects. Many solar developers at the utility scale are facing massive troubles nowadays with land acquisition and permitting for these larger projects. For instance, many solar projects at a megawatt or higher spend up to 3 years in kind of permitting limbo. And so having a creative way to use land that wouldn't have otherwise be used for utility scale solar construction could be a massive value add to these larger scale developers. And we at FunduSol believe that our data-driven approach to agrivoltaics can add significant value to projects like that and change the landscape, not just of the solar industry, but of agriculture as well. So that brings us to the end of our slides, and we'd now love to handle some questions from you guys.
Great, thank you, Pete and Esteban. We have quite a few questions split between technology and business model as well. So maybe we'll start with just a couple around the technology. So can you speak a little bit more to the validation? What does validation look like, practically speaking? So you have the model output a couple of different designs that are expected to have quite different performance, and you can actually test those side by side, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the main kind of component of that would be, well, our algorithm's predictive. So any given system, any growing season, any crop, it'll give you some set of predicted performances of it in terms of solar output, in terms of crop yield, in terms of optimal irrigation schedule. So the main way that we'd be validating the algorithm is for each system, we'd have some prediction, and then there would be some real world data for how it actually performed and compare the two. Hopefully they'd be quite close to each other, but if not, then kind of diagnose where things went wrong and modify the algorithm accordingly.
Okay. And in terms of the how the model is working, so particularly on the biomass side is what interested me. So is there enough data about how plants respond to different amounts of shade and different, temperature variations and irrigation? Like is that data available for many different kind of crops to enable you to basically model all these different configurations, or is there some other way of going about that?
Yeah, so there are some publicly available kind of field scale crop biomass models, one of which we've adapted into our own modeling. It is, though you're right, limited generally to more common crops. Currently, we're focused primarily on, I believe, 8 very common agrivoltaic crops. Like lettuce, green beans, tomatoes, so forth. In the future, we would love to fold more crops into that using empirical data, but that is going to be contingent on us getting that data.
Okay. And I'm going to reveal my complete ignorance of farm operations, but logistically, when you have a photovoltaic array out there on the farmland, does it complicate just the planting and harvesting and et cetera, or how does that impact the farm operations if you have a deployed system?
So yeah, it most certainly does impact farm operations, but the good thing is that a lot of crops and harvesting strategies are very compatible with agrivoltaics, but some are not. And for that reason, we would not work with any crops that grow very tall, that require a lot of sunlight, because those kind of go against what agrivoltaics is. But certain crops like lettuce that are shade tolerant and can be hand harvested work very well with agrivoltaics. And the market for that is still huge. So, and in certain situations, farmers will have to adjust practices for harvesting, but the value add from being energy independent and the increased yield associated with agrivoltaics far outweighs any adjustments that farmers would have to make in terms of harvesting. And if we determine through our analysis that the value add is not worth these adjustments, such as for very tall crops, or again, crops that are not shade tolerant, then we don't recommend agrivoltaics for that farm. But as it turns out, many farms, and obviously all of our current clients, they do have the resources and the crop profiles necessary to work really well with agrivoltaics.
Right. And sort of taking that into account, do you have an estimate on maybe on the scale of the US or globally, if you want, sort of maximum solar output that if you had full deployment of agrivoltaics?
Wow, well, that's going to be a very big number because, as you mentioned, we have millions and millions of acres around the country that could be repurposed for agrivoltaics. And just to give a figure, I guess, of what that could look like, we currently have a project in the works that is around 320 acres, and that has the capacity to support about 50 megawatts of agrivoltaics. So if you extend that to the United States, Pete's better at math than I am, so maybe you can do the numbers in my head, but extending that to all of the farmland available in the United States, and obviously adjusting for different crops and farms that may not be compatible with agrivoltaics, you're looking at several gigawatts of agrivoltaics potential in just the United States.
Okay. But this is a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So I want to thank you again for the presentation and telling us about Fundusol, and we're excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Matthew.
Fantastic. Okay, so our last presenter is Lizzie Kolar. She is the founder and CEO of Scope Zero. Scope Zero is a fintech platform that facilitates a new employee benefit called a carbon savings account, somewhat akin to a health savings account, that enables employees to reduce their CO2 footprint through upgrades to residential infrastructure, and boost corporate sustainability goals. Just as an interesting fact to set the stage here. So the average US home could reduce their utility bills by 40% with relatively simple efficiency upgrades. So Lizzie, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you. My name is Lizzie Kolar. I'm co-founder and CEO of Scope Zero, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. At Scope Zero, we created the Carbon Savings Account, or CSA. And the CSA is both a financial wellness benefit for employees and a corporate sustainability strategy for employers, because ultimately we're providing strong financial incentives for employees to upgrade their home tech and personal transportation, which then reduces a company's work from home and commute emissions. So first, just a brief introduction about myself and my co-founder. My background is in mechanical engineering, and my expertise lies within residential utility consumption. I used to work for Ameresco, where I was designing cost-effective energy and water efficiency upgrades for military base housing all over the US. I left Ameresco for a graduate program at Stanford that's called Sustainable Design and Construction, so focuses on energy efficient building design. This is where I met my co-founder, Caitlin, whose background and expertise happens to be within employee benefits. She used to work for Guideline, which is a 401k fintech provider. So when we combined our experiences in corporate sustainability, employee benefits, and residential utility consumption, we were able to find a way to make those areas intersect to create real impact from both a financial and an environmental wellness angle. So with the carbon savings account, we use a simple and familiar employee benefit framework where you have the employee and the employer both contributing funds to the account. And then the employee uses that money for eligible home technology and personal transportation upgrades that reduce their utility bills, fuel spend, and carbon footprint. So these upgrades can be everything from an Energy Star refrigerator, LEDs, a low flow shower head, a new heating system or a cooling system. These first four categories are what we refer to as efficiency upgrades. You can also use your CSA for energy, like home solar and storage, or clean transportation, like electric vehicles, commuter bikes, public transit. It is very wise for an employee to use a CSA to make these upgrades because of how unbelievably wasteful the average US home is. Just with simple efficiency upgrades around the average US home, you can reduce your utility bills by about 40%. If the average employee took advantage of all CSA eligible upgrades, they could save their home more than $5,000 per year. Because we're able to so significantly reduce the cost of living, that's how we truly position ourselves as a financial wellness benefit, which greatly broadens our employee engagement as opposed to if we only targeted folks that are concerned with their carbon footprint. And then another important feature of our platform is that we measure all of the financial and environmental savings associated with the upgrades. This is what is fed into a company's sustainability reporting because home tech upgrades reduce work from home emissions and transportation upgrades reduce commute emissions, both of which are a part of a company's overall footprint and can be quite significant. So our product is a platform that facilitates the benefit. Ultimately, you can think about it in three main pillars: fintech, marketplace, and analytics. Our fintech pillar, with our fintech pillar, we create and administer an individual bank account for every employee that enrolls in the CSA. We can also directly integrate with the majority of payroll systems to automate contributions and employee census updates so we know who's eligible for the benefit. Every employee that enrolls will have access to a CSA debit card. If you forget your card when you're making a purchase, we have reimbursement functionality on the platform, and then we verify that the purchases are in fact CSA eligible. For our marketplace pillar, this is where we're building out a network of partner vendors that sell and install the eligible upgrades. Employees don't need to purchase through the partner vendors, but it's a nice to have, which can really help with the logistics of home tech upgrades. Based on the analytics I'll speak to in a second, we're able to provide customized product recommendations and direct employees to relevant vendors or products. We can also surface relevant utility and government rebates because our goal is to make these purchases as affordable and accessible as possible. And this can be quite a complicated area to navigate on your own. And then we also have interactive savings calculators on the platform. So employees can go in and see how much energy, water, or money they might save from upgrading to an Energy Star dishwasher, for example. And then for our analytics piece, we create an energy and water profile of each employee's home and then a fuel profile of each of the vehicles. That's how we provide the customized upgrade recommendations and do the financial and environmental performance tracking, which is then fed into a company's sustainability reporting. So just to give you an idea of what the user experience looks like, here's our employee dashboard. You can see the account balance at the top, a handful of recommended upgrades based on your profile, your lifetime financial and environmental savings from CSA upgrades, a breakdown of your relevant utility spend, your recent purchase activity, and then in this left navigation bar, you can find the other features that I just walked through. Similarly, we have a dashboard built out for employer admins so they can see company-wide financial and environmental savings, and then a breakdown of the enrollment and participation statistics. And just to give you an idea of how substantial these environmental savings can be, I'm actually going to take a step back and talk about the name of our company, Scope Zero. So first, let me talk about the standard accounting procedure that companies use when they report on their carbon footprint. So it's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and it separates carbon emissions for companies into three different categories: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So Scope 1 emissions are any emissions that come from fossil fuels that are burned on site at a company. So if you're a restaurant that has a natural gas stove, burning that natural gas on site would create what we call Scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are any emissions that come from energy usage, but they're burned off-site. So for the restaurant example, if your lighting is powered by an electric grid that is connected to a coal power plant, those emissions would be part of your scope 2. Scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are usually the easiest to measure and control. Scope 3 gets a bit more difficult because it includes all emissions from your company's value chain. So for a restaurant, that could be all of the emissions that went into the food, to the transportation of the food to the restaurant. It could be the emissions that went into creating the cutlery or the to-go containers. Scope 3 also includes work from home and commute emissions. So just as a kind of a clever play on words, we define scope 0 as the emissions of employees' personal lives. And so we only include personal transportation and home utilities right now, but especially with the shift to hybrid and remote work, there's becoming much more overlap with scope 0 and scope 3 emissions in the form of work from home and commute. So of course, it depends on the size and industry of the company, but we did a case study with Nike and we found that their scope 0 emissions are 5 times scope 1 and 2 combined, basically on the same order of magnitude as scope 3, and arguably much easier to address because it's such low-hanging fruit. And by providing a carbon savings account to reduce work from home and commute emissions, not only are you reducing your company's scope 3 emissions, you're also providing a financial wellness tool that provides immediate and long-lasting savings for your employees. Just to touch a little bit on one of our recent launches with a Fortune 100 company, we hit their maximum enrollment within the first 10 days. Already 65% of enrollees have used their CSAs to make significant home tech upgrades. We're talking anything from appliances to smart irrigation systems and cooling systems. We're finding that for every dollar the company contributes towards CSA purchases, employees are spending around 3 to 4 times that. So the carbon savings account is proving to be quite an effective leverage tool in unlocking this proactive climate positive spend. And then lastly, one of my favorite things about the CSA is how equitable it is in really being able to meet every employee where they are with their personal home and transportation setup. So we see a wide range of participants, whether it's renters, homeowners, rural folks, urban folks, or folks that live in red states or blue states as well. I would say when I talk about our customer traction, we see interest from any industry, but the 3 biggest buckets that are most common for us would be companies with formal climate commitments. They typically have a sustainability team in-house as well. Financial services and consulting companies, I group them together because I think they're attracted to the CSA for similar reasons. I think firstly, they really appreciate the financial wellness that we provide. And then secondly, they want to walk the walk with the CSA and then encourage their portfolio companies or corporate clients to use it as well, because it is such an effective tool in improving a company's ESG. And then of course, we see a lot of resonance with mission aligned companies. So whether that's climate tech companies or even HR tech companies as well. So just a brief overview of where we are now. We're about to launch our next round of fundraising here this fall. We'll use this round of funding to really focus on our customer reach, particularly targeting those customer groups that I just mentioned. Also building out our channels to reach HR and ESG leaders. So, on the benefits side, you can partner with benefits brokers or consultants. And then on the sustainability side, we can partner with sustainability consulting firms that put together comprehensive corporate sustainability strategies for companies. And we're just another piece of that puzzle. Ultimately, our goal is to standardize the carbon savings account as an expected benefits category. So here in a few years, it will be the norm for companies to provide healthcare, retirement, and then sustainability benefits through a carbon savings account. And so with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lizzie. And first of all, congratulations on the really exciting traction that you're getting so far. So that's really great to see. A couple of questions on business model. You made a really compelling case for the value to the employees and the employer. Can you give us a little bit better sense of the business model? Is there sort of a initial fee that the employer pays, and then based on participation you get some percentage of that, or is it based on purchase? How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few different revenue streams. The first two that I'll speak to are standard within the employee benefit space. So the first is a small monthly fee that's charged to the company per employee. The second is around the fintech side of things. So it can come from account balance interest or interchange on this on purchases. And then a third tried and true revenue stream is a commission of purchases that are made through our partner vendors. So those three are really our most reliable or predictable revenue streams. But a fourth one that I'm most excited for, especially if trends continue to evolve as they are, is really around our data analytics side of things. You know, we're already measuring the carbon savings associated with these upgrades. So there's a lot of opportunity to capitalize, whether it's in the carbon credit space or just ESG metrics in general, or just the level of insight we'll have into consumer behavior has quite a bit of value too.
Yeah, so that leads to my next question. It's quite a bit of functionality in your product. So an impressive amount of data that you have to collect, you know, from vendors, you know, analysis of impact on efficiency, on carbon savings, you know, information about government programs. Did you see all of that as sort of critical to having your minimum viable product, or is that something that you've sort of added on? Did you start with something much simpler, or did you sort of view that as you need to have that whole package in order to make this work at the outset?
Yeah, the functionality can definitely evolve in stages. I think the most critical first step is that financial incentive that comes through the employer match. And as soon as the employee has that free money in their hands, that's when step two kicks in, which is really around the logistics of, okay, now I have the money, what do I buy? And so the bulk of our employee experience is really focused on that education. So whether it's from our customized product recommendations or the interactive savings calculator, or directing them to relevant vendors or surfacing the utility and government rebates, those just all add to the ease of logistics and can often reduce the overall cost as well. So a lot of that functionality already exists on the platform and has really exciting room for growth as we progress.
And you mentioned this sort of the study with Nike, I think it was about you know the total opportunity for the Scope 0 emissions. Are you getting traction with companies? Are they going to report these as Scope 0 emissions, or are they going to, you know, companies that issue a sustainability report, for example? Has there been discussion around bringing this in as a category, or would it be grouped in with Scope 3 as you alluded to?
Yeah, so technically it would be grouped in with Scope 3. If there ever became a category for Scope 0, that would be wonderful, but it's not 100% necessary. So, you know, the carbon savings that are associated with home tech and personal transportation, some of them are Scope 3, some of them are just personal emission reductions, right? Because not all of your home emissions are work from home emissions. So our platform is able to delineate those two. So employers are aware of what is actually a Scope 3 reduction and what are just other carbon emission reductions that they're enabling. And so that delineation helps with how they report on the success from the carbon savings account.
Okay, and I'm going to finish with a similar question to what I asked Esteban. If you imagine sort of, you know, making this a standardized benefit, a standard benefit as you described, what do you think is the total carbon emissions reductions? And again, you can pick sort of maybe just stick with the U.S. If this became standard at Fortune 500 companies, or however you want to analyze it. What do you think is the total opportunity in terms of the carbon savings?
Absolutely. So yeah, I will focus this problem as just an employee benefit offering only in the US. Of course, there's much more room for impact if we ultimately offer a direct consumer product and expand globally. So just within the United States, there are 72 million full-time employees that are offered retirement benefits. If every single one of those employees also used the CSA to upgrade their home tech and personal transportation, we could save about $300 billion per year in residential utility consumption and fuel spend, which would be the equivalent to removing about 150 million cars emissions from the road.
Fantastic. Thanks for a really detailed answer. We are actually a little bit over time. I think that's a testament to the really great content today. Lizzie, thank you for this exciting story. Thanks to all of our presenters. Again, I think this was the highest attendance or certainly one of the highest attendances that we've had at an innovation showcase. So thank you all for joining us. And finally, thanks to Danica and Brian for really making this happen. We look forward to seeing you at another innovation showcase in the future. Okay, have a great evening.